Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the hazy, giggly chaos of a world that'll feel suspiciously familiar if you ever went to college, a music festival, or, honestly, a dentist. That's right. Tonight we dive into the wild, questionable, and occasionally face-numbing saga of the 2010s nitrous oxide craze, the shocking Whippets trend. This is a story about a can of whipped cream, a dream, and a generation asking, what if we just didn't feel feelings for 10 seconds? Before we go any further, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. My personal theory is that all bad ideas happen at exactly 1:43 a.m. And now, dim those lights, switch on a fan for that gentle white noise, and get as comfortable as you can unless your neighbour just fired up a whipped cream canister. In that case, maybe switch to decaf. Let's pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered what would happen if you combined TikTok attention spans, 2000s rave culture, and a childhood obsession with dessert toppings? Did you ever stare at a can of Reddi-wip and think, this could change my brain chemistry? Would you survive an afternoon music festival surrounded by people in neon fur boots and the unmistakable hiss of a whipped cream charger? Could you resist peer pressure when the only thing standing between you and a questionable life choice is $1.99 at the corner store? And what's it really like to wake up the next morning, memories as spotty as your phone screen, and try to explain to your boss why you smell like vanilla and regret? Congratulations, you've just woken up in the mid-2010s. There's glitter on your face, bass vibrating through the floor, and someone just asked if you want to get dizzy. Welcome to the era of Whippets. Before there were headlines, before the YouTube fails, there was just a humble can of whipped cream. Nitrous oxide or laughing gas started life as a dentist's party trick and a baker's secret ingredient. But somewhere between Victorian dessert carts and the invention of Instagram, this innocent kitchen tool became a shortcut to a 10-second vacation from reality. Let's set the scene. It's the late 19th century, and dessert is a serious affair. Picture white-gloved waiters pushing ornate carts through candlelit banquets, delicately topping trifles and tarts with impossibly fluffy clouds of whipped cream. The secret to this culinary miracle? Nitrous oxide. Originally, it was a marvel of food science, a gas that could transform ordinary cream into a sugary mountain of joy, all with a hiss and a puff. Nobody at the time looked at their eclair and thought, this could really spice up a Wednesday night in a college dorm. But the story doesn't begin in a bakery. It starts even earlier, in the dimly lit office of a 19th century dentist. Dentists, bless their souls, discovered that nitrous oxide did more than whip cream. It whipped away pain too. A patient could go from white-knuckled dread to loopy contentment with a few breaths. Suddenly, a trip to get your tooth yanked felt like a vaudeville act. Giggles, wobbly limbs, and the surreal realization that you no longer cared about your molars or your dignity. Fast forward a few decades. Industrialization makes everything cheaper, faster, and shinier. Nitrous oxide gets bottled, canned, and distributed to bakeries, restaurants, and eventually the corner grocery store. By the 1950s, the whipped cream can has found its home in the American refrigerator, right next to the orange juice and the mysterious container of leftovers you're pretending not to notice. A squeeze on the nozzle is a modern miracle. Instant cream for your pie, your hot cocoa, your midnight snack. Whipped cream becomes the universal topping, the finishing touch on birthdays, holidays, and, let's be honest, many late-night, low-stakes emotional crises. And then comes the shift, the quiet moment where culinary genius meets human curiosity, and, inevitably, a tiny dose of poor decision-making. Someone, somewhere, shakes the can, tips it upside down, and takes a cautious inhale. The world tilts. There's a flash of giddiness, a sudden rush, a feeling not unlike the first time you realized your body could betray you with hiccups in the middle of a school presentation. For about 10 seconds, all your worries dissolve into static, your voice sounds like a chipmunk underwater, and you're pretty sure you could solve world peace if you could only stop laughing long enough to explain your theory. By the time the 2010s roll around, the whippet has become an open secret, known to every high school parking lot, every festival porta potty, every college dorm where boredom and snack foods reign supreme. Whipped cream cans are no longer just the crown jewel of the dessert table. They're a rite of passage, a punchline, and, occasionally, a minor plot twist in family Thanksgiving drama. The hiss of the can becomes as familiar as the pop of a soda tab, and you learn quickly that the biggest danger isn't the gas, it's explaining to your grandmother why you went through 4 cans of Reddi-wip and still don't have any pie. Of course, not everyone is in on the secret. Parents stare suspiciously at grocery bills, dentists give knowing side eyes, and store clerks start to recognise the telltale signs: a sheepish smile, a nervous glance, and an unusual number of whipped cream cans in a single purchase. The trend drifts quietly through pop culture, showing up in music videos, sitcoms, and the background of parties where nobody's really sure who brought the can, but everyone has an opinion about what to do with it. At its core, the birth of the whippet trend is a perfect storm of modern life, part nostalgia, part innovation, and part the undeniable urge to find new ways to amuse ourselves when reality feels a little too real. Maybe that's the true magic of the humble whipped cream can. It's proof that even the most innocent kitchen invention, in the right hands, or the wrong ones, can become a ticket to a story you'll be telling for years, or, if you're unlucky, explaining to your doctor at your next checkup. In the end, the can goes back in the fridge, the dessert gets served, and life carries on, a little stranger and a little funnier than before. Because in the long winding tale of human ingenuity, sometimes the best inventions are the ones that start with dessert and end with just a touch of absurdity. You'd think inhaling something used to make your cheesecake fluffier would be harmless, but take a deep breath, literally, and suddenly your world gets fuzzy. Your voice sounds like a malfunctioning robot, and your legs forget what standing means. The science is weird, the effects are immediate, and absolutely nobody looks cool doing it. Let's take a closer look at what's happening in your body when you tip that can upside down and chase a 10-second high. Nitrous oxide, with the charming nickname laughing gas, is a colourless, sweet-smelling molecule that's been used in medicine and food since before anyone had a smartphone. When inhaled, it zips through your lungs and into your bloodstream, slipping past your body's usual defences like a ninja with a PhD in chemistry. Within seconds, it heads straight for your brain, the control room for all good and very bad ideas. Once there, nitrous oxide pulls off its signature trick. It starts blocking NMDA receptors, tiny, crucial chemical switches in your neurons. In plain English, this means the normal conversations your brain cells have with each other turn into a garbled group chat, full of autocorrect errors and weird emoji. Thoughts slow down, the world softens at the edges, and your sense of time goes as haywire as a broken microwave clock. You might hear echoes in your ears, see the room spinning slightly, and feel like gravity's gotten a little too ambitious. At this point, you're in what scientists call a state of dissociation. That's a fancy word for your mind goes one way, your body goes another, and both of them seem to be on different conference calls. It's not unlike the feeling you get after standing up too quickly, except instead of seeing stars, you're suddenly convinced you're starring in a low-budget remake of Alice in Wonderland. Meanwhile, your laughter, giddy, uncontrollable, and vaguely alarming to onlookers, comes courtesy of nitrous' ability to mess with dopamine, the brain's favourite reward chemical. This is where the laughing in laughing gas comes from. Even if nothing is actually funny, and let's be honest, nothing about sitting on a beanbag chair in a basement is ever really that hilarious, your brain throws you a free comedy show anyway. Of course, all this science comes at a cost, because nitrous oxide doesn't just mess with your mind. It also gives your nervous system a big temporary hug, cutting off some of the oxygen your body needs. That's why your limbs might tingle, your fingers fumble, and your ability to stand up is replaced by a sudden and overwhelming desire to lie on the nearest available carpet. It's like your whole body collectively decided to take a smoke break. If you're unlucky, you get a side of headache, nausea, or the fleeting existential crisis that always arrives right after you realise you've been giggling at your own reflection for way too long. And then, almost as quickly as it started, the whippet ride is over. The nitrous is gone, and you're left blinking in the aftermath, wondering if you learned anything. Spoiler, you didn't. And hoping no one took a video. Your body starts to reoxygenate, your neurons reconnect, and your voice stops sounding like you're auditioning for the robot uprising. There's a faint, lingering sensation of having pressed pause on reality, and then hit play again, only now you're a little behind on the plot. Compared to other substances, nitrous oxide is a sprinter, not a marathoner. The high is brief, the effects vanish quickly, and the science leaves you with more questions than answers, like why we ever thought inhaling dessert gas was a good idea in the first place. But for those few seconds, you become a living science experiment, a walking PSA, and the punchline to your own inside joke. And if you're lucky, the only lasting side effect is a renewed appreciation for plain old gravity-based breathing. In short, it's a quick, weird, not at all glamorous trip to the outer edges of consciousness, powered by the same molecule that makes your Sunday Instagram-worthy. Science has never looked so silly or so covered in whipped cream. Nitrous oxide had a long, respectable career as a pain reliever, until the 2010s when it staged a dramatic midlife crisis. Overnight, it abandoned dental chairs for EDM festivals and sketchy after-parties, trading scrubs for glow sticks and the faint whiff of coconut-scented regret. Let's rewind to the golden age of nitrous in medicine. Picture yourself nervously gripping a dentist's armrest, the faint scent of antiseptic in the air, a tray of gleaming metal instruments in the background. There's nothing quite as humbling as the dentist's office. You're bibbed up, mouth agape, and every sense of dignity is replaced by the hope that you'll leave with more teeth than you arrived with. That's where nitrous oxide made its name. The mask drops down, the dentist says, just breathe normally, and suddenly you're floating away from your problems, your body present, your mind off on a lunch break. Everything softens, time slows, and even the drill sounds vaguely amusing. For more than a century, laughing gas was a staple of the medical world, saving millions from the raw medieval terror of unanesthetized dental work. But the world changed, and so did our relationship with pain, and, it turns out, pleasure. By the late 20th century, anesthesia technology was advancing, pain was better managed, and trips to the dentist no longer felt like a Greek tragedy. Meanwhile, nitrous was quietly moonlighting in another, much less clinical arena: the kitchen. Whipped cream chargers, little silver bullets of compressed gas, were now found in bakeries and restaurant supply stores everywhere. No prescription necessary, just a sweet tooth and a sense of culinary adventure. And then came the cultural tipping point, the 2010s, a decade powered by social media, meme culture, and a collective willingness to turn almost anything into a party. Nitrous was ready for its rebrand, no longer satisfied to gently lull nervous patients into a giggle fit before their root canal. It started showing up in places no dentist could possibly have imagined. Underground raves, music festivals, and the kinds of house parties where the furniture is inflatable and there's always someone in the corner performing interpretive dance. At first, it was subtle. You'd be at a festival, somewhere between the porta potties and the food trucks, and you'd hear that telltale hiss, a sound that, until recently, meant someone was prepping your dessert. Now, it meant someone was prepping for a 10-second vacation from reality. Little silver cartridges passed from hand to hand, balloons bobbing in the night, laughter erupting in waves as groups of friends took turns entering the great cosmic spin cycle. Why the sudden leap? The answer lies in a perfect storm of opportunity and attitude. Nitrous was legal, or at least not strictly illegal, cheap and easy to obtain. Unlike the shadowy substances whispered about in high school health class, this was hiding in plain sight, in your refrigerator, your local cafe, and, yes, the back room of every supply store that sold whipped cream by the case. All it took was curiosity and a tiny bit of engineering. Soon the dentist's old friend had found a new tribe: festival goers in neon, college students on a budget, anyone looking for a way to make their Friday night slightly more surreal. By the time the trend peaked, the migration was complete. Nitrous had traded the soft lighting and soft rock of dental offices for strobe lights and thumping bass. Its clientele swapped out nerves for nostalgia, anxiety for adrenaline, and those powder blue bibs for mesh tank tops and glitter. Dance floors became a swirling ecosystem of colour, music, and, floating above it all, the occasional balloon bobbing like a lost party favour. Somewhere, a dentist wept. Of course, this new chapter wasn't all harmless fun. The medical community watched with concern as a substance they'd long respected became a punchline, a viral trend, and a source of emergency room visits. Articles appeared, warning of risks, oxygen deprivation, nerve damage, and the always dramatic sudden sniffing death. But for most revellers, the dangers felt as distant as the dental office they'd happily left behind. In the end, nitrous oxide's journey from dentist to dance floor is a story of reinvention, proof that even the most respectable substances can't resist the siren call of youth culture, loud music, and questionable decision-making. One moment you're easing someone through a root canal. The next, you're the secret ingredient in the wildest party of the decade. The lesson? Never underestimate the midlife crisis of a molecule with a taste for both medicine and mischief. If you ever wondered what happens when you combine poor impulse control, bass drops, and thousands of strangers in tutus, look no further than a 2010s music festival. Whippets fit right in, a cheap legal buzz and the promise of an existential crisis in under 10 seconds. Let's imagine you right now standing in a field surrounded by a sea of neon. There are people in fuzzy animal hats, someone selling questionable grilled cheese out of a van, and a guy who swears his LED hula hoop can unlock the secrets of the universe. The music is loud enough to vibrate your internal organs. Welcome to the epicenter of the rave renaissance, a place where reality takes a weekend off, and personal boundaries are about as substantial as the biodegradable glitter stuck to your cheeks. It's the height of festival culture. Coachella, Electric Daisy Carnival, Tomorrowland, names that conjure up images of endless crowds, flashing lights, and the overwhelming scent of sunblock, sweat, and optimism. Somewhere between the main stage and the art installations that look like someone's fever dream about space travel, you'll find a small group crouched in a circle, heads together, giggling uncontrollably. In the middle of this circle, balloons, dozens of them, bobbing around like party favors at a toddler's birthday, except instead of helium, they're filled with the latest festival essential, nitrous oxide. Whippets weren't just accepted in this world, they were celebrated, almost like a mascot for bad but mostly harmless decisions. You could spot the veterans, a belt with canisters clipped to it, a practiced thumb for puncturing the charger, and a knowing grin that said, "This isn't my first existential rodeo." Festival first-timers, on the other hand, approached the ritual with a blend of curiosity, mild fear, and the hope that no one would tag them in photos the next day. What made Whippets so appealing in this setting? For starters, accessibility. Unlike substances that require cryptic text to strangers named DJ Pickles, nitrous was sold in broad daylight, right next to the churros. Vendors carried backpacks full of chargers and balloons, announcing their presence with the subtlety of an air horn. Some called it hippie crack, a name that sounded edgy enough to be whispered by festival security, but not serious enough to scare off your average accountant on holiday. But the real draw was the effect itself. A high that arrived faster than the drop in a Skrillex track and faded before your friend could finish telling you about the time they almost met Diplo. 10 seconds of floating euphoria, distorted sound, and the profound realization that, yes, your hands do look a little funny in this light. The communal aspect sealed the deal. There's nothing like locking eyes with a stranger across a field, both of you mid-laugh, barely balanced on your own 2 feet, united by a mutual, "What are we doing?" moment. Of course, it wasn't all pure fun. The festival environment turned every Whippet session into a minor logistical operation. Balloons burst, chargers jammed, and someone always lost the tiny metal tip in the grass. Security alternated between pretending not to see and pretending to care, depending on which way the wind was blowing. And, inevitably, there was the one friend who decided to give a heartfelt TED talk about the dangers of recreational inhalants, while everyone else was still busy sounding like malfunctioning robots. As the sun went down and the lights came up, the air filled with the familiar hiss of chargers and the distant rumble of bass. Whippets became a punctuation mark, a way to end a conversation, begin a new friendship, or simply pass the time between sets. In the grand chaos of the rave renaissance, they were the perfect sidekick. Not quite illegal, not quite safe, and always good for a short-lived story you'd half remember by Monday. When the festival ended, you packed up your tent, shook the glitter out of your shoes, and tried to recall if you'd actually solved any of life's mysteries, or just spent too long staring at your own hands. But one thing was certain: Whippets and festival culture were made for each other, both fleeting, both absurd, and both destined to leave you wondering if maybe, just maybe, you should stick to churros next time. There's something about a beat drop that makes everyone want to lose their mind, sometimes literally. As dubstep ruled the airwaves and festival speakers, the Whippet hiss became a secret rhythm in the background of 1,000 regrettable Snapchat stories. Picture yourself at the peak of a 2010s EDM festival. The air is thick with anticipation, humidity, and the lingering smell of vape juice. Above the pulsing crowd, speakers the size of minivans vibrate with every bass line. You're surrounded by an ocean of swaying arms, foam glow sticks, and people dressed in outfits best described as cyber-rave astronaut with commitment issues. The music isn't just loud, it's inside you. Every thump seems timed to the erratic rhythm of your own questionable choices. And then, right in the middle of a perfect teeth-rattling build-up, there's that unmistakable sound. The hiss of a Whippet charger, quick and sharp, almost musical. It cuts through the noise, a secret signal to anyone in the know. To outsiders, it might sound like someone airing up a flat tire. To the festival faithful, it's the drumroll before a 10-second voyage to another dimension. EDM and Nitrous Oxide became natural partners, two halves of the same short attention span. As DJS layered synths and sirens into ever more complicated arrangements, ravers layered on effects of their own. With every drop, half the crowd bounced, and a brave few seemed to hover an inch above the grass, clutching balloons and giggling like they'd just discovered electricity. Let's not pretend it was only happening at the big outdoor shows. College parties and basement raves, complete with thrift store strobe lights and a Spotify playlist called Ultimate Bangers, saw the same trend. The Whippet hiss became the unofficial fifth member of every DJ lineup. It didn't matter if you were in a sold-out stadium or wedged into someone's laundry room next to a broken ping-pong table. If there was dubstep, there was almost certainly someone chasing the beat with a lungful of dessert gas. Of course, the soundtrack to bad decisions didn't stop with music. It extended to the blurry, spontaneous media that came with it. Snapchat, Instagram and Vine, RIP, were flooded with clips of friends mid-Whippet, mouths frozen in that cartoonish O, eyes wide and unfocused, the camera shaking with laughter. What started as a minor, slightly embarrassing experiment quickly became content for the world. For a brief period, it was impossible to scroll social media without stumbling on a video of someone's uncle dabbing to Skrillex while a balloon floated out of frame. The Whippet hiss was never the star, but it was always in the supporting cast. What made this pairing so powerful, so sticky in the memory of everyone who lived through it, was how perfectly Nitrous matched the music. Dubstep is built on tension and release, a kind of musical cliffhanger that pays off with an explosion of sound. Whippets, too, are all about build-up and payoff. Shake the can, fill the balloon, hold your breath, and then drop. For a few dizzy seconds, the world syncs up in a blur of lights, sound, and questionable decisions. Naturally, the two trends fed off each other. DJS noticed. Some leaned in, pausing for dramatic effect right as the crowd collectively lost its balance. If you could isolate the sounds of a festival, you'd hear music, shouting, and, tucked right in, the hiss-pop of another canister emptying into festival folklore. But as with all great soundtracks, there was an undertone of melancholy. The beat drops would fade, the gas would run out, and reality, sweaty, sunburned, and a little embarrassed, always came back on the upstroke. The party would end, and the only things left were the memories, the blurry videos, and a subtle, lingering regret that maybe the best stories were the ones you didn't record. Still, for a moment, Whippets and dubstep were inseparable. A secret, silly duet echoing through the wildest corners of a generation's collective memory. And if you ever find yourself nodding along to an old festival anthem, don't be surprised if, somewhere deep in your brain, you also hear the faint, mischievous hiss of a whipped cream charger keeping time. Step inside a college dorm circa 2013, and you'll find a jungle of laundry piles, ramen wrappers, and somewhere under the bed, a suspiciously large collection of empty whipped cream cans. The campus police were confused, the RA was exhausted, and you were just hoping nobody called your mum. College life has always been a balancing act between newfound freedom and the gentle threat of total collapse. On any given night, your dorm room could host a study group, a Mario Kart tournament, and an impromptu therapy session about the existential horror of student loans, all within the same hour. But 2013 added a special twist to campus chaos, the era of the Whippet. Suddenly, whipped cream canisters weren't just a topping for Friday night waffles. They were an unofficial currency, traded in hushed tones and stashed behind textbooks like a creamy aluminum secret. It started innocently enough. You and your roommate, bored between midterms and motivated by a TikTok you definitely shouldn't have watched, found yourselves in the baking aisle, eyes drifting from chocolate chips to the promise of extra creamy. The first few cans came home as a joke, a culinary experiment, you told yourselves. But soon, your fridge was less about groceries and more about plausible deniability. And with every empty can, the collection under your bed grew like a weird, slightly sticky art installation. Dorm room economics quickly adapted. The clever students realised that if you bought in bulk, you could become the Amazon Prime of Whippets. Friends of friends started showing up at your door, all of them eager to trade single-serve ramen or the last Gatorade for a hit off the good stuff. The entrepreneurial spirit thrived. The line between business major and mild outlaw became blurrier than your vision after 2 balloons. It didn't take long for the word to spread. Entire floors developed reputations. 4th was for engineering majors, quiet, always cold. 2nd was where the party was. You could hear it through 3 layers of cinder block. And 3rd, that was Whippet territory. The RA, who had dreamed of mentoring the next generation, now spent most of their evenings performing surprise room checks and Googling is whipped cream flammable. Campus security, meanwhile, began to dread the sight of recycling bins on Monday mornings, always overflowing with a rainbow of spent canisters. They issued warnings, wrote memos, and once even tried to host a seminar called Whipped Cream, Friend or Foe? Attendance was low, but it wasn't all fun and games. There was an undeniable sense of camaraderie in the chaos. You learned to trust your neighbours, mostly because they knew your secrets and had photos from the Halloween party. People took care of each other, making sure nobody overdid it, always ready with water, a granola bar, or a gentle reminder that classes still started at 8 a.m. Sometimes, the balloon would pop too early, sending whipped cream everywhere and triggering a collective sprint to clean up before anyone in authority arrived. A Whippet mishap became a bonding moment, a story that would get funnier every time you told it, even as you swore you'd never do that again. For many, Whippets were just a phase, one more bizarre chapter in the ever-expanding novel of questionable college decisions. When finals came around, the cans disappeared as quickly as they'd arrived, replaced by caffeine pills and flashcards. But the legacy lingered. Years later, you'd visit campus and find a single cream charger rolling under a bench, a tiny time capsule of that lawless, laughter-filled semester. Still, as absurd as it sounds, the Whippet era captured the real essence of dorm life. Experimental, chaotic, and absolutely full of unexpected twists. Nobody wrote it into the college brochures, but somewhere between the late-night snacks and last-minute cramming, you learned a little about chemistry, a little about friendship, and a lot about cleaning up sticky messes before your mum came to visit. And if you ever wondered whether you truly lived the college experience, just check your recycling bin. If it rattles, congratulations, you survived the Wild West of cream chargers. Forget designer drugs. The real moneymaker was lurking in the refrigerated aisle of your local gas station. Nitrous chargers and whipped cream cans became the low-stakes, low-commitment rebellion for anyone too broke or too lazy for real vices. Let's take a nostalgic walk through the fluorescent-lit aisles of the all-night gas station, a place where dreams, dignity, and dietary decisions go to die. The candy rack is a shrine to poor impulse control. The beverage cooler a dazzling display of will this keep me awake through work tomorrow? But if you squint past the rows of energy drinks and questionable hot dogs spinning endlessly on metal rollers, you'll spot a treasure trove that quietly fueled a generation's most absurd trend. The humble, whipped cream can. It started as a convenience. Whipped cream was there for your midnight pie, your 2 a.m. hot cocoa, or, in moments of pure desperation, sprayed directly into your mouth while pretending your problems didn't exist. Nobody batted an eye at a teenager buying 3 cans for a party, or a sleep-deprived grad student grabbing a multipack for a study group. Whipped cream was the edible alibi nobody questioned. What the clerk didn't know, or pretended not to know, was that the real draw wasn't the sweet, fluffy topping, but the tiny, high-pressure universe sealed inside. Enter the Whippet. Unlike most forms of rebellion, this one didn't require a fake ID, a risky meet-up, or a secret handshake. It required $2.49, a backpack, and the courage to make direct eye contact with the cashier while purchasing an implausible amount of dessert topping. Gas stations quickly caught on. Some stores started stocking extra cans, their managers quietly delighted by the spike in sales that couldn't possibly be explained by the number of pumpkin pies being baked on campus. Whipped cream became the unofficial mascot of I want to have a wild Friday, but also be in bed by 11. Then came the chargers, those sleek metallic cartridges stacked next to the coffee filters or tucked behind the counter for baking professionals only. Everyone knew someone who had a friend who knew a guy who could get you a whole box, no questions asked. Some gas stations even got creative, putting up handwritten signs that read, "1 can per customer, per visit," as if the true criminal masterminds wouldn't just walk out, change hoodies, and stroll back in. The beauty of the gas station Whippet was its accessibility. There was no exclusive club, no velvet rope, no pretense of sophistication. You didn't need to know a DJ, own a fake fur coat, or have a playlist called Deep House Chill Vibes. All you needed was a willingness to embrace the absurd and the ability to withstand the judgmental look from a clerk who'd seen it all and really didn't care. Of course, there was always an element of danger, or at least the thrill of being slightly outside the law. Urban legends circulated, the clerk who would card you for whipped cream, the town where whipped topping was kept behind glass like high-end liquor, the mythic story of someone getting banned for suspiciously frothy breath. Each tale was retold and embellished, passed down through generations of students like a bedtime story with a moral: never get high on your own supply of Reddi-wip. Yet, for all the jokes and half-hearted crackdowns, the Whippet remained the ultimate entry-level rebellion. It was low risk, low investment, and rarely led to more than a mild headache and a kitchen floor that mysteriously stuck to your socks. In a world of increasingly complicated vices, it was refreshingly simple. The whole operation took less time than brewing coffee and left less evidence than burning microwave popcorn. And when the trend finally went truly mainstream, it wasn't at a festival, or a rave, or even a dorm room. It was in the parking lot of a gas station at 1 a.m, as you and your friends sat on the curb passing around a can, debating life's big questions, like whether whipped cream was technically a vegetable. It was a moment of unity, hilarity, and just enough stupidity to make you feel alive. The gas station goldmine wasn't just about nitrous. It was about accessibility, community, and the universal truth that sometimes the silliest revolutions start in the unlikeliest places, under flickering lights, with a can in hand and the promise of a 10-second escape from the ordinary. If it wasn't recorded, did it really happen? The internet demanded proof. Soon, TikTok and Vine were flooded with videos of people taking hits from whipped cream cans, with outcomes ranging from mild giggles to epic faceplants, and occasionally a full-on existential crisis caught on camera. In the ancient days, meaning roughly 2012, social media was already a sprawling buffet of questionable trends. Ice bucket challenges, cinnamon spoonfuls, planking on public monuments, humanity's greatest hits, all preserved in pixels and peer pressure. The rise of the WhipTok challenge felt inevitable. Whippets had always existed in the shadowy corners of parties and festivals, but now, with a single click, every questionable choice could be immortalized and served up for global consumption. TikTok, Vine, Instagram, these platforms became the coliseum where reputations were won and lost in 10-second clips. Suddenly it wasn't enough to do a whippet at a party. You had to perform. It was choreography, slapstick, and a little bit of daredevil all at once. People filmed themselves taking a hit, laughing uncontrollably, and then falling over like malfunctioning marionettes. If you were lucky, you landed on a beanbag. If not, you became a minor celebrity for your spectacular collision with a coffee table, the soundtrack, dubstep obviously, or whatever music was trending that week, because nothing pairs with nitrous-induced confusion like an EDM remix. WhipTok became its own hashtag, a wormhole of content both hilarious and mortifying. Everyone had their own spin. Some dressed in elaborate costumes, others did it as a group for the coordinated chaos, and a few turned it into a slapstick relay race. Somewhere, there was always a dog in the background looking profoundly disappointed in humanity. The more outlandish the outcome, the more likely the clip was to be shared, reshared, and stitched into 1,000 reaction videos. Internet fame, it turned out, was just a balloon away. And then there was the escalation. Because, as everyone knows, the internet can't just leave a bad idea alone. If a solo whippet got 100 likes, a double whippet challenge was sure to get 1,000. The WhipTok arms race led to creative stunts, synchronized inhaling, whippet Olympics, and the inevitable moment someone's grandma wandered into frame at the worst possible time. For a brief glorious moment, whipped cream cans outsold actual whipped cream in some markets, all because nobody wanted to be left out of the trending tab. There was also the dark side, because every viral trend has one. For every video of a harmless tumble, there was another where things got a little too real. Someone fainted, someone panicked, and someone else, deep in the comment section, shared a public service announcement about the dangers of inhaling things you find next to the pudding aisle. Health officials issued warnings, news stations ran exposés, and somewhere, a parent frantically Googled, "What does it mean if my child smells like dairy and bad decisions?" But if you want to understand the full power of whip talk, you have to look at what came next. The community. Suddenly, people who'd never met were swapping stories, rating faceplants, and sharing tips for hiding empty cans from suspicious roommates. Whip talk duets became a thing. One person inhaled, another stitched in to narrate the outcome in the style of David Attenborough. Live streams drew viewers from around the world, all tuning in to watch strangers chase a 10-second high, united by the universal human need to do something a little bit dumb together. For all its dangers and absurdities, Whip talk captured the true spirit of the internet era. Impulsive, collaborative, chaotic, and endlessly self-referential. The Whippet became more than a party trick. It was a digital rite of passage, a badge of having lived through the era where social media was king and dignity was, at best, optional. And when the trend finally faded, replaced by the next viral oddity, all that remained were the clips, tiny looping monuments to a generation's appetite for laughter, spectacle, and the occasional existential crisis caught on camera. Because in the age of whip talk, if it wasn't filmed, did it ever really happen? Only your FYP will know for sure. It's not glamorous, it's not subtle, and it's definitely not productive. The typical Whippet high feels like a roller coaster designed by someone who failed physics, brief, disorienting, and always accompanied by the nagging sense you left your dignity somewhere near the snack table. Let's break it down. You're in a cluttered living room, surrounded by people in various states of questionable decision-making. Someone shakes a can, another person finds a balloon, and everyone settles into that peculiar hush reserved for the moments before something objectively dumb. You exhale, inhale, and suddenly there it is. Wonderland, sort of. The first second is pure confusion. Your senses throw up their hands and walk out the door. The room tilts ever so slightly, your vision blurs at the edges, and a wave of pins and needles tickles your arms and face. There's a rushing sound in your ears, like white noise, or 1,000 tiny refrigerators humming at once. You try to speak and hear your own voice, echo back with the comedic timing of a malfunctioning robot. This is the moment when you realize you're very much not in Kansas anymore. Seconds 2 to 5. Time stretches and bends. Every color seems brighter, every sound somehow both far away and way too close. Your friends are cackling at something, possibly at you, possibly at nothing at all. You try to remember how to smile and discover you're already doing it. For reasons you can't explain, this seems absolutely hilarious. Gravity, always suspicious in these situations, starts to feel optional. If you stand, you're likely to find the floor much sooner than planned. If you're sitting, you become one with the beanbag, an honorary potato, perfectly content. The laughter bubbles up out of nowhere. It's not about anything in particular. It's just there, pushing its way out, insistent and contagious. There's an infectious, childish giddiness to the whole experience, a little like the world's shortest slumber party prank, except the only thing getting shaved is a sliver of your dignity. You can't stop grinning. Your brain, briefly liberated from adult responsibilities, decides that everything from the way your socks feel to the sound of your friend's hiccup is the single funniest thing on earth. By second 6, you begin the descent. The fog lifts as quickly as it arrived. Your senses stumble back into the room, a little dishevelled, not quite sure what they missed. The pins and needles fade, the sounds normalise, and your vision snaps back to standard issue reality. You're aware again of your body, your friends, the sticky ring of spilled soda on the coffee table, and the fact that you're still clutching an empty balloon like the world's saddest birthday clown. And then comes the aftermath, the moment of existential clarity that follows all great questionable decisions. What just happened? Why did you do that? Who took that video? You look around and realise you're not alone in this philosophical crisis. Everyone else is blinking, looking vaguely sheepish, and pretending their hands aren't a little shaky. The room is a chorus of, well, that was weird, and who wants pizza? There is a shared, unspoken understanding that whatever just transpired will be filed under temporarily funny, permanently regrettable. Compared to other escapades, a Whippet high is mercifully brief. No hours lost, no elaborate come-down, just a quick dip into nonsense and back out again. like a theme park ride that's over before you finish screaming. For some, it's exhilarating. For others, it's just plain awkward. Either way, the risk-reward ratio is questionable. You get a handful of giggles, a dash of embarrassment, and a healthy respect for the laws of physics, which it turns out are not as flexible as they feel in the moment. So if you ever find yourself in the Whippet wonderland, remember, it's not about enlightenment, it's about entertainment. 10 seconds in, 10 seconds out, and hopefully 10 lessons learned about the value of keeping both feet firmly planted on the ground and maybe away from the snack table. While everyone else was busy losing brain cells, a few clever entrepreneurs turned the trend into profit. Cream charger sales skyrocketed, head shops added nitrous to their lineup, and suddenly there was real money in making people temporarily forget the quadratic formula. Let's follow the money trail, which, as always, starts in the most unassuming places. Cream chargers, those little silver bullets of culinary innovation, were invented for chefs, bakers, and anyone determined to turn Sunday pancakes into a gravity-defying experience. But somewhere along the way, the humble cream charger became the hottest commodity this side of the campus bookstore. Bakeries placed bulk orders, sure, but the real spike happened when word got out about what else those chargers could do. Overnight, kitchen supply meant something very different if you listened closely to who was asking for same-day shipping. Then came the gas station boom. Convenience store managers found themselves restocking shelves at a rate that defied both dessert trends and basic logic. Whipped cream cans vanished in record numbers. Retail analytics teams scratched their heads, trying to figure out why the frozen pie section was collecting dust, while Reddi-wip was flying off the shelves like it was Black Friday for lactose enthusiasts. The answer was simple. The canisters had found a new calling, and their real audience wasn't worried about topping cocoa. The profits didn't stop at gas stations. Head shops, those emporiums of incense, rolling papers, and questionable glassware, smelled opportunity and pounced. It wasn't long before culinary-grade nitrous oxide chargers took up prime shelf space, right next to the novelty lighters and novelty pipes. If you wanted a balloon filled with the promise of temporary amnesia, you now had options and plenty of friendly staff eager to explain the legal grey area. Enterprising individuals began ordering cream chargers by the crate, selling them at parties or festivals at a steep markup, turning a couple of dollars into a mini-fortune with every sold-out box. For a brief, glorious moment, you could pay your rent with nothing but empty canisters and word-of-mouth advertising. But the economy didn't stop at the obvious suppliers. Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, and other online trading posts became virtual bazaars of party supplies. Sellers used code words and not-so-subtle winks for baking only, as they arranged drop-offs in parking lots, parks, and dorm stairwells. There was a certain Wild West spirit to it. Just enough risk to keep things interesting, not enough to deter anyone with Wi-Fi and an entrepreneurial streak. As always, where there's a trend, there's a black market, and Whippets were no exception. Of course, as the money flowed, so did the scrutiny. Lawmakers and health officials started to notice when cream charger sales outpaced birthday cake sales by a margin of 10 to 1. Some jurisdictions cracked down, requiring age verification for whipped cream purchases or limiting the number of canisters you could buy at once. The end result? A brisk trade in creative workarounds, buying in bulk, recruiting friends, or taking a road trip to the next town over, where the gas station manager didn't care if you bought a dozen cans and a single bag of Doritos. For the true capitalists, it wasn't just about the product, it was about the experience. Entrepreneurs threw Whippet parties, sold branded balloons, or set up makeshift charging stations at music festivals, complete with ambient lighting and someone's cousin DJing a set from their phone. It was the gig economy in its purest form, low overhead, high turnover, and no customer loyalty whatsoever. A Whippet customer was here for a good time, not a long time. In the end, the Whippet economy was an object lesson in supply and demand, flavoured with a dash of nostalgia and a pinch of legal ambiguity. The real winners weren't the people chasing a fleeting high, it was the people who understood that wherever there's a shortcut to dopamine, there's someone willing to sell the map. If you ever want to see capitalism in action, messy, creative, ridiculous, just follow the trail of empty canisters and cash, and you'll find it leads inevitably to someone's trunk at a parking lot party, grinning from ear to ear, counting singles, and waiting for the next big trend. If you thought the fun ended when the can ran out, think again. Welcome to the Whippet hangover, a uniquely modern misery involving headaches, foggy memories, and the haunting suspicion you agreed to something deeply embarrassing on group chat. Let's talk about the morning after. The party's over, the music is a distant memory, and the living room looks like the aftermath of a culinary tornado. Balloons litter the floor like forgotten confetti, empty cream chargers rattle underfoot, and the faint scent of synthetic vanilla clings to every available surface. You sit up slowly, because your brain is gently knocking on the inside of your skull, politely demanding to know what, exactly, you were thinking. The first thing you notice is the headache. Not the dignified, poetic kind you get from staying up too late reading Russian literature, but the dull, insistent throb of a brain that's been deprived of oxygen in the name of a fleeting giggle. It's not catastrophic, but it's relentless, a constant low-level reminder that your neurons aren't entirely thrilled about last night's experiment. No amount of water, coffee, or ancient home remedies seems to touch it. Advil only makes your wallet lighter. Then comes the mental fog. You shuffle around the kitchen, trying to recall exactly where you left your dignity. Simple tasks, making toast, finding your keys, forming coherent sentences, feel just a little bit harder than usual. Your thoughts drift in and out like a badly tuned radio. Every now and then, you get a flash of memory. The way your voice sounded 3 octaves too low, the look on your friend's face as they toppled off the couch, the moment someone started a philosophical debate about whether whipped cream counts as a vegetable. There's a group chat, of course. There's always a group chat. You pick up your phone with a sense of dread, scrolling through an endless stream of photos, videos, and voice notes. There's you, staring into the camera, eyes wide and vacant, balloon in hand. Someone's turned it into a meme already. The real horror comes when you spot the part where you apparently volunteered to organise the next group project, or promised to finally ask out that barista, neither of which, in the cold light of day, seems remotely achievable. And then there are the physical side effects. The fatigue, the weirdly stiff jaw from laughing too hard, the mysterious bruise on your shin that you absolutely do not remember earning. Whippets, unlike their more notorious chemical cousins, don't linger in your system for days on end, but they do leave you with a sense that your body and mind aren't quite on speaking terms. There's the distinct possibility that your IQ took a temporary dip, and your brain is out to lunch, somewhere in a foggy, balloon-filled field contemplating its choices. You might also notice a creeping sense of existential dread. It's not just the standard Sunday scaries, it's a flavour all its own. The brief, silly euphoria of the night before is replaced by the question, why did I do that? Was it worth it? Should I see a neurologist, or just swear off dessert toppings forever? These questions loop in your head as you open the fridge, stare at a half-empty can of whipped cream, and silently vow never to do that again, at least until someone suggests it at the next party. For the unlucky few, the aftermath is worse. Nitrous oxide, when abused, can do more than just cause headaches and embarrassment. Heavy use can lead to a deficiency in vitamin B12, nerve damage, and, for those truly dedicated to poor decisions, a trip to the ER. The fleeting fun comes at a price, and it's usually paid in brain cells and sheepish confessions to medical professionals who have seen it all and are never ever impressed. And yet, despite the headaches, the fog, and the nagging suspicion that your friends now have enough blackmail material for a decade, the Whippet hangover eventually fades. By lunch, you're mostly back to yourself. By dinner, you're ready to laugh about it, spinning last night's embarrassment into a story for the ages. You survived somehow, and next time, you might even have learned enough to pace yourself, or at least to hide your phone. Because if the Whippet trend taught us anything, it's that the high is brief, the aftermath is longer, and the real legacy is the stories you'll retell, carefully edited long after your head stops hurting. It started as a joke. Then it spread like wildfire, with each partygoer convinced they'd invented the world's funniest, most original bad idea. Suddenly, Whippets were everywhere, at birthday parties, graduation bashes, and, regrettably, the office holiday mixer. Let's rewind to the humble beginnings. A friend of a friend shows up at a party, pulls out a can of whipped cream, and grins with the kind of mischievous confidence usually reserved for magicians about to reveal a rabbit. Someone's already got a phone out because if it isn't filmed, did it really happen? The first round is tentative, a little awkward, and inevitably met with nervous laughter. But after one person giggles their way through a 10-second Whippet high, everyone wants a turn. Just once, they say, as if that's how it ever works. Before you know it, the dessert table is empty, the trash can is full of spent charges, and someone's aunt is using a balloon as a hair accessory. The magic of the Whippet party trick was its accessibility. You didn't need special equipment. Well, not unless you wanted to look like a pro. You didn't have to memorize any complicated rules, and nobody had to track down a shady character named Chet. Whipped cream cans were there for the taking, innocent, familiar, and always lurking in the fridge next to the leftovers. Even if you'd never tried a Whippet, you could recognize the can, and that made the leap from topping to party favour feel more like a natural progression than a calculated risk. It wasn't long before the trend started showing up in places you wouldn't expect. Birthdays, obviously, nothing says congratulations. You're another year closer to needing dental work, quite like a group of adults giggling through a chorus of happy birthday, balloons bobbing in the background. Graduation parties? Absolutely. What better way to mark the end of an academic era than by temporarily forgetting everything you just learned about the periodic table? Even family barbecues weren't safe. All it took was a bored cousin, a little curiosity, and a willingness to risk being the story at every reunion for the next decade. The office holiday party deserves its own special mention. Somewhere between the awkward Secret Santa exchange and the HR-mandated karaoke session, someone inevitably produced a can of whipped cream and announced, "Let's liven things up." If you've never watched your supervisor discover the wonders of nitrous oxide while wearing an elf hat and a haunted expression, you haven't truly experienced corporate America. There's a reason team building never appears on a can of Reddi-wip. But as the party trick spread, so did the mythology. Each group swore their method was the best. Balloon, straight from the can, synchronized hits set to dubstep. Techniques evolved, stories grew taller. Soon, every party featured at least one Whippet sage, the person who knew the correct grip, the perfect inhale, and all the internet folklore about how to avoid cream lip. If someone dropped a charger on the floor, it was treated with the solemnity of a lost wedding ring. By midnight, the Whippet had gone from a goofy sideshow to the main event. With popularity came problems, as trends often do. Whippets migrated from parties to public events. Music festivals became a sea of bobbing balloons. Outdoor barbecues morphed into impromptu chemistry lessons, and more than one wedding slideshow included a blurry clip of the bridal party in hysterics, surrounded by empty cans. Local news stations caught wind, running exposés on the whipped cream menace and interviewing experts with impressive frowns. Supermarkets imposed limits, 1 can per customer, no exceptions, not even for pie. The most telling sign that the Whippet had truly gone viral, when it was no longer funny. What began as a shared joke became an expectation, a party obligation, the thing you had to do if you wanted to fit in, at least for the next 10 seconds. Even people who never planned to try it found themselves in the Whippet crossfire, passing the can, nodding along, and wondering if there was still some dessert left somewhere in the chaos. And so, the Whippet party trick, born in laughter, raised in viral video glory and ultimately consumed by its own popularity, became another entry in the long, proud history of seemed like a good idea at the time. The cans get tossed, the balloons deflate, but the stories, those last forever, popping up at the next party with the same unstoppable momentum as the original trend. And you just know, somewhere, someone is already prepping the next round, convinced that this time, they're the first to ever think of it. Here's the not-so-funny part. Inhaling nitrous oxide can do more than just make you giggle. As emergency rooms filled with wheezing 20-somethings and articles warned of sudden sniffing death, the Whippet craze got a little less hilarious. For all the memes, giggles and party stories, there's a darker undercurrent to the Whippet trend, one that didn't fit neatly into a 10-second TikTok. Nitrous oxide, for all its reputation as the lightweight party drug, comes with some real risks, the kind that don't show up until the party's over and the last balloon is popped. The science is simple, the consequences less so. When you inhale nitrous, you're not just getting a burst of euphoria, you're also displacing oxygen. For a few seconds, your brain is starved of the good stuff, left to run on empty while you float in a haze of artificial joy. That feeling of dizziness and disconnection, it's not just the gas doing its thing, it's your neurons quietly panicking. In mild doses, most people bounce back, but if you push it, multiple hits in a row, long sessions or mixing nitrous with other substances, you run the risk of oxygen deprivation, known as hypoxia. The symptoms range from headaches and confusion to more serious territory. Fainting, seizures, or, in rare but terrifying cases, cardiac arrest. Sudden sniffing death isn't just a headline cooked up by nervous parents. It's a real phenomenon, and it's as dramatic as it sounds. Sometimes all it takes is a moment of bad luck, a missed breath, a lost balloon, a body that just wasn't built for this kind of nonsense. And then there's the cumulative damage. Nitrous oxide isn't metabolized like alcohol or processed through your liver. Instead, it interferes with vitamin B12 in your body, an essential nutrient for nerve health. Regular heavy use can lead to nerve damage, tingling in your hands and feet, numbness, weakness, and in some cases lasting neurological problems. There are stories, quiet ones, often whispered on message boards, of people who woke up unable to walk properly, left with a constant pins and needles sensation that never really went away. Not exactly the funniest home video moment anyone signed up for. The dangers didn't stop there. Whippets, unlike their medical counterparts, aren't delivered in a safe, controlled environment. At parties and festivals, safety takes a backseat to impulse. There's the risk of frostbite from a cold canister held too long, the possibility of choking or falling, or the all-too-common accident of inhaling directly from the nozzle and damaging the sensitive tissue in your throat and lungs. Most of these incidents never make the highlight reel, but they're real, and for the unlucky few, they're the only memory that lasts. The medical community, for its part, started sounding the alarm as soon as the trend took off. ER doctors reported an uptick in otherwise healthy young patients showing up with shortness of breath, confusion, or even seizures. Toxicologists issued statements. News outlets dusted off their most serious fonts and ran exposés, complete with ominous music and blurry footage of discarded whipped cream cans. For every story about a wild night, there was another about an ambulance ride nobody expected. And while most people who tried Whippets walked away with little more than a headache and a regretful text to their group chat, a small but growing number found themselves dealing with longer-term consequences. It's the unglamorous side of the trend, the one everyone laughed off until it happened to someone they knew. The lesson, for all its silliness and surface-level innocence, the Whippet trend came with an asterisk. Behind the laughter, there were real risks: oxygen deprivation, nerve damage, and the ever-present potential for things to go sideways fast. It's a reminder that even the silliest shortcuts to euphoria can come with a price, and that sometimes the only thing more dangerous than a bad idea is thinking it can't possibly happen to you. So the next time you see a can of whipped cream at a party, maybe just save it for the pie. Your brain, and your future self, will thank you. It wasn't just teenagers seeking a cheap thrill. Office workers, stressed parents, and bored adults everywhere discovered that a can of whipped cream was the easiest ticket to temporary oblivion, no judgment and no hangover, allegedly. Let's be honest, adulthood isn't all it's cracked up to be. There are bills, deadlines, meetings that could have been emails, and the ever-present soundtrack of "we should really fix that, insert broken thing here." It's only natural that sometimes the people holding everything together want to check out for just a moment. In the 2010s, with the Whippet craze in full swing, the urge for escape no longer belonged solely to the under-21 crowd. All across suburbia and open-plan offices, grown-ups discovered that dessert could double as a coping mechanism. Picture it: you're at a Friday night game night with friends. You've all brought your best adult snacks, fancy cheese, expensive crackers, at least one bag of kale chips that nobody actually wants. Then someone, let's call him Greg, disappears into the kitchen and returns holding 2 cans of whipped cream with a conspiratorial grin. It's not long before the party has drifted from charcuterie to low-stakes chemical experimentation. Turns out you can add brief dissociation to the list of party tricks that don't require babysitters. Or maybe it's a PTA potluck, the kids running around the backyard, adults clustered in little groups swapping stories about taxes and the inexplicable price of printer ink. Suddenly the fun mum from down the street produces a can from her purse, not for the brownies, but for a round of whippet-fueled laughter in the side yard. The line between responsible adulthood and mild rebellion blurs a little more. After all, what's a little nitrous between neighbours? The workplace too was not immune. Stressed-out office workers, drowning in spreadsheets and stale break-room coffee, found their own creative outlets. Whipped cream cans began to vanish from communal fridges, with the phrase for coffee acting as both an explanation and an inside joke. The staff at office supply stores may have noticed a spike in purchases of balloons and whipped cream, but everyone politely looked the other way. It's hard to judge someone when you too have just survived a 3-hour budget meeting. Of course, the real draw for adults wasn't just the thrill, it was the promise of a quick escape, a chance to turn down the anxiety dial, shut off the endless mental to-do list, and float for a few seconds in a world where the only priority is the next burst of laughter. No hangover, no awkward explanations, just a momentary pause button on grown-up responsibilities. It was almost meditative, in a deeply unserious way. But as with all shortcuts to relaxation, there were a few catches. Adults are excellent at rationalizing their vices. It's just a little whipped cream, not a trip to Vegas, but that doesn't mean the aftermath was always smooth. There's something uniquely humbling about explaining to your 7-year-old why there are 8 empty cans of whipped cream in the recycling. The Monday after a Whippet weekend brings its own special flavour of existential dread, right between did I send that email and should I see a chiropractor for this balloon-related neck pain? And then, inevitably, comes the group text, the photos, the blurry videos, the friend who now claims they invented the trend in college. The stories get retold, sometimes at backyard barbecues, sometimes whispered at the edge of the soccer field, always with that undertone of, I can't believe we actually did that. The line between adult and adolescent, wisdom and whimsy, grows fuzzier with each retelling. In the end, Whippets were just another chapter in the long book of things adults try in their quest to make life a little lighter, a little sillier, and a lot less stressful. Maybe you only tried it once. Maybe you became the neighbourhood's unofficial whipped cream consultant. Either way, the lesson is clear. Escapism knows no age limit, and everyone, no matter how many responsibilities they juggle, deserves a little break from reality. Even if that break comes with a faint smell of vanilla and a recycling bin full of empty cans. It turns out you can sell a lot of dessert topping if people think it's also a recreational drug. Whipped cream companies played it cool, quietly riding the wave while pretending not to notice why sales spiked every festival season. Let's set the scene in the supermarket dairy aisle circa 2015. There, among the Greek yogurts and orange juice, stands the humble whipped cream can, once the hero of family birthday parties and late-night Sundays. But something's changed. The shelves are restocked more often, the flavours are getting weirder, and the family-size cans have never been more popular. Festival season hits, and suddenly even the most obscure store brands are flying off the shelves. Whipped cream, for reasons not entirely explained by the number of pies being baked, is having its biggest moment since the invention of banana splits. Of course, the official story is all about dessert. Ad campaigns lean into nostalgia, slow-motion shots of strawberry shortcakes, kids with sticky faces, perfectly coiffed dollops perched atop hot chocolate. But somewhere in a quiet conference room, a team of marketers stares at a spreadsheet, puzzled by the sudden demographic shift. Sales spike at music festivals, college towns, and suburban cul-de-sacs. What are people putting this stuff on exactly? Behind the scenes, the industry had a front-row seat to the Whippet trend. They noticed the seasonal patterns, the steady increase in accidental can punctures, and the fact that for every pie bought, there were 3 cans of whipped cream in the cart. Brands responded the only way a well-behaved corporation knows how: plausible deniability. No need to mention the other use. Just make sure shelves stay stocked, and quietly ignore the college student who buys 12 cans and no cake mix. Some companies doubled down, launching new flavours and extra-large party-size cans, each one a subtle wink to the in-the-know crowd. The more creative brands even flirted with extreme dessert branding, hinting at fun, energy, and a wild night in every squirt, but never quite saying the quiet part out loud. Behind every Whip Up Your Night campaign was a silent agreement. You do you, just don't tag us on social media. Meanwhile, retailers noticed the trend and adapted in real time. Grocery store employees reported entire shelves cleaned out the week before a big festival. Convenience stores bumped up their whipped cream orders and quietly changed their return policies. Sorry, we don't accept returns on dairy. There were even rumours of stores putting up 1 can per customer signs, but enforcement was spotty at best, especially when faced with a determined 22-year-old in festival gear and the confidence of someone who believes whipped cream is a legitimate food group. At the heart of the sales explosion was the perfect blend of accessibility and ambiguity. Whipped cream is fun, festive, and utterly ordinary. No one looks twice at a few cans in your basket unless they know what to look for. It's the snack that literally smiles back. Cheery graphics, playful fonts, and that familiar sound. A Pavlovian trigger for both childhood nostalgia and, well, something a little less innocent. The real winners in the whipped cream gold rush weren't the people on TikTok, or even the enterprising gas station clerks. It was the manufacturers, who managed to sell more product, expand their market, and avoid all responsibility with the world's most innocent poker face. It was the ultimate corporate sidestep. Profit from the trend, deny everything, and continue placing tiny balloons on the packaging as if nobody would ever make the connection. As for the rest of us, we're left with full fridges, sticky hands, and the collective knowledge that sometimes even the most wholesome snacks have a second life as cultural phenomena. So next time you grab a can, pause for a moment. Is it for dessert, for the party, or just for the sheer joy of pressing that nozzle and hearing the cheerful hiss? In the Whippet era, you never really know. And the whipped cream companies, they're just happy you keep coming back for more. There's an irony in explaining to your doctor that the same gas they gave you at the dentist is now why you can't feel your legs. Hospitals walked a delicate line, treating whippet-related injuries while issuing stern warnings about responsible dessert use. Picture this. You're sitting in a hospital exam room, legs dangling off the side of the paper-covered table, the faint scent of antiseptic in the air. You're trying to explain to a weary ER doctor why you've suddenly lost all feeling in your toes and why you also have 3 empty cans of Reddi-wip in your backpack. The conversation is surreal. The doctor, who has almost certainly spent the day treating broken arms and mystery rashes, raises an eyebrow as you recount your brief culinary adventure. Somewhere Hippocrates weeps. For decades, nitrous oxide has been a staple in medicine, an anesthetic, a painkiller, a trusty sidekick for nervous dental patients and women in labour. In a controlled clinical environment, it's delivered with precision, a measured dose mixed with pure oxygen, and monitored by people who spent years studying things like airway management and not dying. It's safe, it's predictable, and, crucially, it's used by professionals who don't call it doing whippets. But the 2010s threw a wrench in the works. Suddenly the very same substance found in every dentist's office was turning up in living rooms, festival fields, and college dorms. People were using it with all the restraint of a toddler let loose in a candy store. For the medical community, it was whiplash. 1 minute you're saving someone from a root canal freakout. The next you're lecturing a 23-year-old about balloon safety. Hospitals, meanwhile, faced a conundrum. On one hand, it's their duty to treat every injury and illness, no matter how silly the cause. On the other, there was a sudden need to explain, without sounding like the fun police, that recreational nitrous is, in fact, not as safe as it seems. Doctors found themselves in awkward territory, dispensing B12 shots to numb-legged partygoers, while delivering the same stern talk your mum gave you after you microwaved tinfoil. There's no official medical term for whipped cream mishap, but you can bet it's been scrawled on more than one intake form. The hypocrisy wasn't lost on anyone. Here was a substance that, in a medical setting, was celebrated for its ability to relax, distract, and heal. In the wild, it was suddenly the villain, blamed for a spike in ER visits, neurological symptoms, and awkward family conversations. The medical establishment had to play both sides. We use it every day, but don't you dare try this at home. Of course, hospital staff developed their own coping mechanisms. Some rolled their eyes, others shared stories at break room coffee machines. You'll never guess what I pulled out of a patient's bag last night. There were unofficial contests to see who could keep a straight face while saying balloon-induced neuropathy. Nurses mastered the art of silent judgment, while still bandaging scraped knees and checking oxygen levels. And deep down, everyone knew, as long as whipped cream was legal and the internet was a thing, the patients would keep coming. In response, hospitals launched campaigns about safe use, carefully phrased brochures on the dangers of inhaling household substances, and in some cases earnest pleas to just enjoy your dessert. Health officials pushed for age restrictions on cream chargers, stricter labelling, and perhaps most ambitious of all, for parents to actually check the recycling bin once in a while. Meanwhile, TikTokers just found new ways to hide the evidence. In the end, modern medicine's relationship with nitrous oxide is a lesson in irony, absurdity, and the eternal truth that people will always find new ways to misuse even the most benign substances. Doctors patch up the wounds, pharmacists refill the B12, and somewhere, a dentist sighs as another can of whipped cream disappears from the grocery shelf. The official verdict? Use responsibly. The unofficial verdict? If you're going to chase dessert highs, at least remember to bring your insurance card. As the trend grew, some clever souls tried to make it safer, posting Whippets safety guides online and encouraging proper technique. Spoiler, the only truly safe way to use a whipped cream can is to put it on pie. Let's take a look at the bizarre world of harm reduction in the age of Whippets. As with every questionable craze, the Whippet wave inevitably spawned a self-appointed class of safety experts. These weren't doctors or scientists, but festival veterans, internet commenters, and a handful of YouTube personalities who wore lab goggles purely for comedic effect. If there was a risk, someone would figure out how to minimize it, or at least turn it into content. The advice ranged from sensible, never inhale directly from the can, unless you want to add frostbite to your list of regrets, to the truly surreal, use only food-grade balloons. Party store ones might smell like rubber and sadness. Forums hosted in-depth debates on the best posture for a safe high, whether sitting or lying down offered better protection from impromptu gravity experiments, and which snacks paired best with existential disorientation. Some guides included checklists worthy of a NASA launch. Stay hydrated, have a trip sitter, never do Whippets alone, keep your phone charged so you can Google how to stop being dizzy just in case. But beneath the memes and the shaky iPhone tutorials, the internet's attempt at harm reduction exposed something deeper, an uncomfortable truth that there's only so much you can do to make a bad idea safer. Sure, you could mitigate some risk by not double dosing or mixing with other substances. You could avoid frostbitten lips, blackouts, or a trip to the ER by not pushing your luck. But at the end of the day, the real hazard was the high itself, a sudden plunge into oxygen deprivation, however carefully orchestrated. The medical community, for its part, tried to step into the conversation. Health agencies published their own safer use advisories, gently reminding the public that while harm reduction is better than outright denial, the only way to avoid the risks entirely was, well, not to do it at all. Doctors explained the dangers of nerve damage and oxygen deprivation, while law enforcement and educators launched their own, sometimes hilariously out-of-touch awareness campaigns. "Don't let dessert turn into disaster" is a real slogan, and yes, someone was probably paid to write it. Meanwhile, some clever businesses tried to straddle the line between caution and capitalism. Head shops and online sellers started labelling charges with vague warnings, hinting at proper culinary use while knowing exactly who their target audience was. A cottage industry of safety products emerged: padded balloon holders, decorative charger cases, even harm reduction kits that looked suspiciously like the world's least festive party favour bag. Yet even with all the precautions, accidents still happened. People fainted, fell, or simply overdid it. Some ignored the warnings, convinced that their favourite YouTubers' pro tips were all the guidance they'd ever need. After all, if it's trending online, how dangerous could it really be? The echo chamber of advice became a feedback loop, one that reassured anxious participants while quietly ignoring the fundamental problem. You can't make a risky thing risk-free just by crowdsourcing clever hacks. In the end, the Whippet harm reduction saga reads as a case study in human optimism, stubbornness, and the internet's endless appetite for loopholes. The guides might have helped some avoid the worst mistakes, but they never changed the underlying reality. The safest use for a can of whipped cream is still on top of a slice of pie, not as a passport to temporary oblivion. So if you ever find yourself scrolling through Whippet safety tips, take a moment to reflect. Sometimes the wisest advice really is the oldest. Just eat your dessert and leave the science experiments to the professionals. Your nerves and your dignity will thank you. Nothing says this is a real trend like lawmakers getting anxious. States began passing regulations, store clerks asked for ID, and somewhere in the Midwest, a city council debated the moral perils of aerosol desserts. For a while, Whippets floated in the grey area between harmless fun and actual concern, a not technically illegal loophole big enough to drive a Reddi-wip truck through. But when whipped cream canisters started disappearing from grocery shelves at a rate that far outpaced the nation's pie consumption, someone in a government office finally noticed. What followed was the legislative version of a panic attack: hearings, hand-wringing, and inevitably a set of hastily written regulations with more holes than a festival tent. It began with headlines, news anchors gravely warning of the whipped cream crisis, local papers running exposés with titles like "Danger in the Dairy Aisle." As the Whippet craze reached its peak, policymakers decided it was time to do what they do best: regulate and restrict. Some states passed laws requiring age verification for whipped cream purchases. "Must be 18 to buy dessert-topping" signs popped up, often taped below the "no shirt, no shoes, no service" placards. Other cities went further, demanding ID for cream chargers and imposing fines on stores that sold too many to a single customer. Never mind that you could just come back in a new hoodie and buy more. The rules themselves ranged from sensible to absurd. Some states tried to ban nitrous charges entirely, discovering almost immediately that this would cause chaos among innocent bakers and brunch-loving grandmas. Others attempted to track purchases, as if a spreadsheet could keep up with college students determined to host the wildest bake-off on campus. There were passionate debates at city council meetings, complete with testimony from concerned parents, local chefs, and the occasional festival enthusiast explaining with a straight face why he needed 50 canisters for pavlova night. Of course, for every crackdown, there was an equal and opposite workaround. People got creative, buying in bulk, driving across state lines, or turning to online party supply shops that happily shipped cream chargers with a wink and a for culinary use only disclaimer. Some shops required a signature, others offered subscription services, and a select few disguised the charges in packaging so innocent it could have fooled a grand jury. The law, as always, struggled to keep up with human ingenuity. Meanwhile, enforcement proved challenging. Store clerks, already busy checking EDs for cigarettes and alcohol, now faced the baffling task of interrogating customers about their dessert plans. Some embraced their new role as whipped cream gatekeepers, while others shrugged and rang up the cans with all the enthusiasm of a DMV clerk on a Friday afternoon. The real winners? Gas stations and convenience stores just outside city limits, which became pilgrimage sites for whippet-seeking weekenders. As the months rolled by, lawmakers grew frustrated. The whippet trend refused to disappear, adapting to every new regulation like a stubborn weed in the legal garden. There were arrests, usually minor, always embarrassing, of college students caught with suspiciously large amounts of whipped cream at music festivals. There were heartfelt op-eds in the local paper, arguing for stricter controls on aerosol desserts, and for a while, the humble can of whipped cream became a symbol of the never-ending dance between rule-makers and rule-breakers. In the end, the legal battle over whippets proved two things. First, that you can't legislate away human creativity, and second, that nothing draws a crowd like the promise of a slightly forbidden treat. Somewhere, as a city council debated whipped cream morality, an enterprising college student was already planning the next loophole. Because history shows that if there's a way around a rule, someone, armed with a can and a mischievous grin, will find it. No craze is complete without a media panic. Local news ran exposés on whippet parties, while parents clutched pearls and Googled how to tell if your child is high on whipped cream. Spoiler, there is no elegant way to have this conversation. It always starts with a headline. The new teen threat. Dessert in disguise. Flashes across the screen during the 6 o'clock news, accompanied by stock footage of whipped cream cans ominously spinning on a lazy Susan. Reporters, searching for drama in the dairy aisle, camp outside convenience stores and ask pointed questions about recent trends among youth. The segment ends with a serious face, a stern warning, and absolutely no practical advice except talk to your kids before the can does. In living rooms across the country, the panic spreads faster than a dropped can of Reddi-wip rolling under the fridge. Parents gather in the kitchen, whispering in the tone reserved for tax audits and lice outbreaks. Did you know there's nitrous in the whipped cream? How many cans do we have? Should we lock up the fridge? There's frantic Googling, side effects of whippets, what is a cream charger, and the all-important is this why we ran out of dessert at last year's Thanksgiving? The search results don't help. They're a tangle of warnings, horror stories, and a few misguided recipes for homemade mousse. Enter the urban legends. No whippet scare would be complete without stories passed down from neighbour to neighbour, growing more dramatic with every retelling. My friend's cousin's college roommate had to get a new kidney after a whippet party. There's a kid in Oregon who went to the ER because his face froze to a can. Did you hear about the girl who turned blue and had to wear mittens for a year? These tales, rarely fact-checked, gain the power of gospel truth after 2 or 3 retellings in the carpool line. At schools, the rumour mill shifts into overdrive. Teachers call emergency assemblies, guidance counsellors print out sternly worded flyers, and someone in administration awkwardly tries to explain the difference between dessert topping and dangerous chemical. Students listen with the attention span of a ferret on espresso, their main takeaway being that adults are both hilariously out of touch and unintentionally making whipped cream sound way cooler than it is. Meanwhile, the internet does what the internet does best. Memes. The same parents who worry at breakfast find themselves chuckling at viral videos about whipped cream interventions by dinner. TikTok and Instagram become battlegrounds for comedy and concern, one side posting tongue-in-cheek PSAs featuring staged fridge raids, the other side, well, mostly just posting more balloon fails. For every article warning of sudden sniffing death, there's a counter meme. Hide your pies, kids are after the cans again. Behind all the drama, there's an undercurrent of genuine confusion. How do you talk to your child about Whippets? Do you throw out every can in the house? Start reading ingredient labels like a detective? Attempt an awkward open dialogue at the dinner table, only for your teenager to stare at you like you've grown a second head? The advice columns, for their part, aren't much help. Keep communication open, they say, and don't overreact. Easy for them to say. They've never been accused of running an aerosol speakeasy out of their own garage, and yet, for all the pearl clutching, most families muddle through. The worst-case scenarios rarely materialise, and the can of whipped cream returns to its rightful place, on top of a sundae, not the subject of a local news exposé. Still, every so often, a parent will pause in the dairy aisle, either Reddi-wip with a mixture of suspicion and nostalgia, and wonder if this too will be another weird footnote in the endless saga of things parents were supposed to worry about but secretly hoped would just go away. In the end, parental panic over Whippets was less about nitrous and more about the timeless fear that kids would find some new ridiculous way to outsmart their elders. Spoiler, they usually do. And somewhere, in a parallel universe, there's a very confused pie, wondering why it's suddenly so hard to get a decent topping. Nothing is sacred on the internet, and Whippets were no exception. Memes, tweets, and jokes exploded, turning a public health crisis into a running gag about brain cells, clowns, and why your ice cream sundae seems a little less innocent now. The Whippet craze hit the web at precisely the moment when meme culture was thriving, and the collective sense of irony was peaking. What began as a fringe party trick rapidly mutated into viral content, thanks to the internet's uncanny ability to turn any human failing into a punchline. Screenshots of text conversations, "Bro, did you eat the pie or just the can again?" Blurry party photos and reaction gifs of balloon-induced hilarity were everywhere, blending sincere confusion with outright mockery. One popular image showed a whipped cream can with the caption, "The real gateway drug is dairy," while another paired a Renaissance painting of a jester with the words, "When you realize you did all that for 10 seconds of giggling and a mild headache." TikTok and Vine, with their short-form video format, became the front lines of the eternal laughter loop. Teens, college students, and the occasional disillusioned office worker filmed their Whippet experiences, always with a wink to the audience. There were choreographed skits where a balloon would float by in the background of a Zoom call, staged tutorials on the proper way to hide your stash. Spoiler, there isn't one. And endless clips of people wheezing with laughter for reasons that would make no sense to a sober observer. Edits added circus music, slow-motion effects, or abrupt cuts to footage of brain scans. The joke was always the same. Look how ridiculous this is, and yet, here we are. On Twitter, Whippet humour found a different flavour, short, sharp, and devastatingly self-aware. Users compared their memory loss to that of a goldfish. If you can remember your social security number after last night you did it wrong, posted confessionals about destroying more brain cells than my college tuition, and invented fictional Whippet support groups with slogans like "Just Sayin' 2.0", hashtag "Games Ran Wild", hashtag "Whipped and Unprepared", hashtag "Dessert Gone Wrong", hashtag "Not Just for a Sundays anymore". For a few months it seemed like everyone had a Whippet take, a Whippet meme, or a Whippet story, even if the closest they'd ever come to inhaling nitrous was licking the bowl after making cake batter. Of course, the internet being the internet, not all the humour was harmless. There were memes that blurred the line between satire and public service announcement, warning of sudden clown syndrome and irreversible pie addiction. Some content creators adopted clown personas, dressing up in full makeup to pantomime the Whippet experience, only to end each video with the classic, "Don't try this at home unless you like awkward conversations with your doctor." Even genuine safety warnings got the meme treatment, recast as pastel infographics with smiling balloons and bold text. If you must risk it, do it with a friend who knows CPR. But for every snarky joke or viral video, there was also a sense of solidarity, a digital, self-aware group therapy where everyone could acknowledge how silly, short-lived, and strangely universal the Whippet era was. The laughter loop fed on itself, memes making jokes about the memes themselves, until the topic became a punchline layered so deep that even the original participants lost track of where the joke started and ended. And so, the internet did what it always does best. It turned a collective moment of questionable judgment into a museum of absurdity, a time capsule of one generation's particular flavour of folly. If your ice cream sundae feels a little less innocent now, blame meme culture. But also thank it for making sure that, in the end, everyone got to laugh at the same joke, even if only for 10 seconds at a time. It wasn't just an American phenomenon. Nitrous Oxide swept across Europe, Australia and parts of Asia, everywhere with a festival, a corner store and a lax approach to novelty kitchen supplies. If you ever doubted the unifying power of questionable decisions, look no further than the global Whippet wave of the 2010s. In London, partygoers passed balloons down cobblestone streets outside warehouse raves, the hiss of a charger blending right in with the bass from the club. Across the Channel in Paris, young people gathered on the Seine with cheap wine, a baguette and a few canisters for dessert, their laughter echoing over the water while locals tried and failed to look unimpressed. The scene was always the same: clusters of friends, a sky full of music, and a trail of empty cream chargers leading back to wherever the night began. Meanwhile, in Australia, Whippets found fertile ground among music festival crowds who had already perfected the art of making a party out of absolutely anything: rain, shine, or swarm of locusts. The infamous nangs, as they're known down under, became a fixture at backyard barbies, bush doofs, and beach bonfires. With every summer, nangsellas appeared on the edges of music events, peddling their wares with the discretion of a street magician and the speed of an Olympic sprinter. Local news ran the inevitable epidemic stories, often filmed in front of mountains of discarded canisters at sunrise, as if the world's most forgetful baker had gone on a baking spree. In Amsterdam, balloons full of nitrous floated through the canals and into the city's tourist shops, sold alongside novelty clogs and cannabis gummies. Shopkeepers feigned innocence, tourists pretended it was for their pancakes, and the city council periodically wrung its hands about public safety, while quietly budgeting for extra street sweepers during festival season. Asia, too, felt the ripple. In Vietnam, Thailand, and parts of China, Whippets showed up at clubs and bars, often hidden behind the respectable face of Western dessert culture. Nightlife promoters offered party packs that included cream chargers, balloons, and, inevitably, instructions for plausible deniability just in case anyone asked. With every new city, the story repeated itself. A canister here, a giggle there, a generation of young people eager to share in the universal language of why not? Naturally, local governments scrambled to keep up. The UK saw a parade of legal loopholes, with new restrictions popping up every festival season, only to be outwitted by entrepreneurs who found ways to sell baking supplies at 3 a.m. on a Sunday. Australia introduced age limits and started issuing fines, only to discover that nothing motivates a college student quite like the challenge of creative procurement. Amsterdam tried warning labels and public awareness campaigns, but nobody pays much attention to warnings when they're printed next to a picture of strawberries and cream. Each country added its own flavour to the mix. In Germany, Whippets found their way into Oktoberfest celebrations, side by side with beer steins and pretzels. In Spain, clubbers chased the high between dance sets, creating a haze of music, laughter, and the ever-present sizzle of the nitrous canister. Even in Japan, home of the world's most polite party guests, someone somewhere surely tried to pair Whippets with matcha, if only for the story. The truly international nature of the craze spoke to something universal: the desire for connection, for escape, and above all for a shared story that could be told and retold wherever people gathered. Whether it was called a whippet, a nang, a la creme, or just that thing you shouldn't do before your big meeting, the trend hopped borders as easily as a festival wristband. The fallout was familiar too: media panic, parental dread, a spike in recycling, and a series of resigned shrugs from anyone tasked with enforcing the rules. In the end, Whippets became a kind of global in-joke, an oddball rite of passage that transcended language and geography. Because if there's one thing the world can agree on, it's that every now and then, a balloon, a laugh, and a little collective nonsense can turn a night into a story worth telling. And cleaning up, apparently, is universal too. Looking back, you might wonder, why did so many perfectly reasonable people inhale gas from a can designed for dessert toppings? The answer, as always, is peer pressure, boredom, and the irresistible human urge to do something slightly stupid in a group. Humanity has a long, proud tradition of fads, from hula hoops to pet rocks, and from Cabbage Patch dolls to Pokemon Go. Every generation seems compelled to unite, even if only for a few months, in a collective act of harmless absurdity. The Whippet craze fit perfectly into this pattern. A flash-in-the-pan phenomenon that started with a few whispers and suddenly swept the nation, and then the world, faster than you can say, "Don't tell my mum." What was it about Whippets that made them so compelling? Why, out of all the things you could do with your Friday night, did the balloon win out over, say, reading a book or making actual whipped cream? First, let's talk about the science of belonging. There's something deeply comforting about being in on the joke, about knowing what to do when someone winks and holds up a can at a party, about being able to tell stories that begin, "Remember the night with the balloons." For a generation raised on viral challenges, memes, and you had to be there moments, Whippets offered a low barrier to entry and a near universal punchline. It wasn't about rebellion, really. It was about inclusion. If everyone else was giggling on the couch, did you really want to be the one explaining why you were reading War and Peace in the kitchen? Peer pressure, of course, played its usual role. But this wasn't the sinister, after-school special kind of pressure. It was softer, subtler. The unspoken promise of laughter and inside jokes, of not missing out on the thing everyone else would be talking about on Monday. Most people weren't interested in getting high, per se. They just wanted to be part of the story, even if it was a very silly one. Everyone's doing it is a cliche for a reason. It works, even if everyone means 3 people in pyjamas and a dog who just wants to lick the empty can. Then there's the simple, universal curse of boredom. When the world feels a little too routine, when work, school and family all blend together in an endless loop of mildly disappointing leftovers and reruns, it's natural to crave a spark of novelty. Whippets weren't just a chemical shortcut to giggles, they were an antidote to monotony. For 10 seconds, you could step outside yourself, shake off the day's responsibilities, and join in a moment of pure, purposeless nonsense. No planning, no commitment, just a brief, shared escape. Of course, the internet poured gasoline on the fire. Social media has a knack for amplifying the ridiculous. Videos of Whippet fails, memes about balloon wisdom, and trending hashtags made the whole thing seem bigger, funnier, and more irresistible than it had any right to be. The feedback loop was real. The more people posted, the more others joined in. Everyone wanted a clip, a story, a snapshot to prove they'd participated in the latest round of collective foolishness. Beneath all of this, though, is something more timeless, the delight humans take in gentle mischief. Doing something slightly stupid, especially in a group, is practically a rite of passage. It's why sleepovers involve toothpaste pranks, why college traditions involve freezing in public fountains, why office parties involve someone photocopying their hand. Whippets were never about deep-seated rebellion or existential malaise. They were about harmless, temporary nonsense, about reminding ourselves that life is supposed to be a little bit ridiculous sometimes. So if you look back at the Whippet era and wonder, why did we do that? The answer is surprisingly comforting. Because we could, because it was funny, and because nothing bonds people together like a little shared stupidity. It's a tradition as old as time, and if history is any guide, it's not going away anytime soon. The next fad is just around the corner. All you need is a group, a prop, and the willingness to laugh at yourself for a while. When stores started cracking down, the black market blossomed. Suddenly, Whippet dealers joined the ranks of questionable festival vendors, and you could buy a box of cream chargers in a parking lot if you knew the right password. It was inevitable, really. Every great trend, once discovered by adults and regulated by lawmakers, finds its way underground. The Whippet phenomenon was no different. What began as a harmless party trick in college dorms and music festivals soon turned into a semi-clandestine enterprise. Part scavenger hunt, part improv theatre, all the fun of buying a pie topping, but with the thrilling ambience of a secret society. First, the signs appeared at gas stations and grocery stores. Limit 1 can per customer, must be 18 to purchase, ID required for whipped cream chargers. As soon as the rules went up, demand only increased. Where there's a shortage, there's opportunity. Enter the entrepreneurial spirit. Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, and back pages of the internet filled with coded listings. Culinary supplies, baking essentials, and specialty balloons became the new dog whistles. People learned to recognize the real sellers by the nudge-nudge, wink-wink language. Perfect for your next big event or whatever you want. The exchange itself became a ritual. Sometimes it was as simple as texting a number you got from a friend's cousin's roommate, meeting behind the laundromat and handing over cash in exchange for a brown paper bag of chargers. Other times, the transaction had the feel of a low-budget spy film. Come to the parking lot, blink twice, ask for Tony's whipped cream kit. You'd feel both ridiculous and slightly dangerous, two emotions that have never failed to attract people under 30. In the festival scene, vendors got creative, offering party packs with a side of plausible deniability. If you ever bought a suspiciously heavy box labelled for gourmet chefs, only from a man wearing a bucket hat at 2 a.m, congratulations, you too have participated in the world's least glamorous black market. What drove the underground whippet trade wasn't just supply and demand. It was the lure of the forbidden, the appeal of feeling in the know. Suddenly, scoring a box of chargers was a story in itself, a modern version of sneaking behind the school to smoke, except your contraband was technically for desserts. Group chats filled with tips, maps and rumours. He's usually at the East Gate after sundown, only accepts cash, and don't wear anything neon. The legend grew faster than the actual business, and like all black markets, there were layers. Entry-level dealers who just wanted enough extra to fund their own fun, mid-tier suppliers with connections to restaurant wholesalers, and the mysterious big fish, the person everyone had heard of but nobody had actually met. Inevitably, this new market brought its own quirks and risks. For one, there was absolutely no quality control. Some buyers wound up with expired chargers, mystery canisters, or, in one legendary case, a box filled with packing peanuts and a handwritten note, "Better luck next time." There were scams, thefts, and a healthy amount of paranoia about undercover cops who, let's be honest, probably had better things to do than stake out a pie-filling exchange. Law enforcement tried to keep up, but every crackdown just moved the market further underground. If you block the doors, people crawl through the windows. If you put up fences, someone brings a ladder. It's a tale as old as time. When the rules get tighter, the workarounds get wilder. The great whippet black market of the 2010s may have lacked the glamour of other underground economies, but it made up for it in creativity and sheer ridiculousness. So, if you ever found yourself wandering a parking lot heart racing on the hunt for a box of baking essentials at midnight, remember, you weren't just chasing a trend, you were taking part in a time-honoured tradition of rebellion, resourcefulness, and, above all, really questionable priorities. In the end, the underground market was less about getting high and more about getting a good story. And that, as every generation discovers, is the real prize. It's all fun and games until the photos resurface. 10 years later, everyone's got a story about a whippet-fueled adventure, usually ending with lost shoes, a weird new friend named Sprinkles, and a solemn vow never to go near a can of whipped cream again. Let's set the scene. It's a lazy Sunday, you're scrolling through old photos on your phone, and suddenly there it is. You in a neon tank top, eyes half shut, clutching a balloon and grinning like you just discovered the secret to happiness. In the background, someone is inexplicably wearing a traffic cone. Another friend is mid-somersault, and there, centre frame, is a cream charger lying next to a half-eaten slice of pie. You stare in horror and awe, flooded by a wave of nostalgia and second-hand embarrassment. Was that really you? Did you really think a balloon could be a good accessory? More importantly, what happened to those shoes? The reality of Whippet adventures is that they always seemed more glamorous in the moment. The euphoria, the group laughter, the shared rebellion against common sense. It all felt like something worth documenting, if only to prove you were there. But what you remember as a legendary night often translates, in photos, to a collection of blurry faces, awkward poses, and an inexplicable number of empty cans. Some images have the energy of Renaissance paintings, dozens of bodies frozen mid-laugh, arms around each other, the universal glow of we probably shouldn't be doing this. Others are just embarrassing. You, attempting to look cool but actually drooling a little. Your friend caught mid-choke. The artistic close-up of whipped cream smeared on the coffee table. And then there's Sprinkles. Every group had one. A random acquaintance, a friend of a friend, or a festival nomad who drifted into your circle and, for one night only, became the heart and soul of the chaos. Sprinkles knew all the best balloon tricks, had a seemingly endless supply of whippet wisdom, and disappeared just as mysteriously as they arrived. To this day, no one's quite sure where they went, but their legacy lives on in 100 tagged photos and at least 3 inside jokes. Regret, of course, comes in waves. Sometimes it's a gentle nudge, a reminder to clear out old group chats, untag yourself from particularly unfortunate angles, And maybe stop bringing up the great whipped cream incident at family dinners. Other times, it's a full-on cringe attack. The realization that your boss, your future spouse, or worst of all your parents might one day stumble across a relic from your brief career as a balloon enthusiast. The internet never forgets, but it does occasionally let you delete things if you're quick enough. But regret has a funny way of turning into reflection. What once seemed mortifying can become a badge of honor. Proof that you lived through a time when nonsense was not only tolerated but celebrated. Those old photos aren't just reminders of questionable judgment. They're snapshots of a moment when life was silly, boundaries were blurred, and fun meant risking a little embarrassment. The vow to never go near a can again might be broken at the next wedding, but the memories, both good and cringe-inducing, will last forever. Years later, when you gather with friends, those group photos resurface for a reason. They're a shorthand for 100 stories. The night you danced in the rain, the festival that went off the rails, the time you all tried to make dessert and ended up making history instead. Each image is a testament to camaraderie, creativity, and the human capacity for shared absurdity. So if you ever find yourself blushing at an old Whippet pic, remember, you're not alone. Every generation has its embarrassing photos, its weird fads, and its regrets turned relics. The trick is to laugh at them, learn from them, and occasionally remind Sprinkles they still owe you a pair of shoes. Now that the haze has cleared and the whipped cream is back where it belongs, we're left to ponder the legacy of the 2010s Whippet craze. What did we learn? What did we lose? And why does every festival bathroom still smell faintly of sweet cream and bad decisions? Every era has its fads, moments that shine briefly, burn bright, and then fade into the background noise of nostalgia and remember when. The Whippet trend, with its hiss of canisters and brief bursts of giddiness, was no exception. At its peak, it felt like everyone, everywhere was in on the joke. Music festivals became balloon graveyards, campus quads echoed with giggles, and every gas station manager developed the same tired, knowing look. But as with all things fleeting and foolish, the party eventually ended. The cans were tossed, the memes archived, and a generation awoke to a collective hangover, literal for some, existential for all. So what, exactly, did the Whippet era leave behind? First and most obvious, a physical footprint. Long after the laughter faded, the evidence lingered in recycling bins, roadside ditches, and under festival bleachers. For a few years, whipped cream chargers were as common a sight as empty water bottles, a shiny reminder that, yes, someone tried to get high right here. City workers and clean-up crews discovered a new, unspoken rivalry. Who could collect more balloons in a single morning? Environmentalists shuddered at the sheer volume of aluminum left in Whippets' wake, an ecological price paid for 10 seconds of euphoria. There were subtler traces too, left not in landfills but in collective memory. For those who lived through it, the Whippet trend became a shorthand for an entire era of recklessness and camaraderie. A little bit silly, a little bit sad, and impossible to explain to anyone who hadn't been there. For every embarrassing group photo and lingering headache, there was also a story, a lesson, and a surprising amount of wisdom gained in the aftermath. Sometimes you only understand the boundaries by crossing them, if only for a moment. Whippets also left behind a legacy of caution. Parents became expert sleuths, sniffing out dessert-topping purchases with Sherlockian suspicion. Schools and universities updated handbooks and incident reports, inventing new acronyms and hosting substance awareness nights that always ended with more questions than answers. The medical world, meanwhile, added whipped cream incident to its unofficial list of avoidable ER visits, wedged somewhere between dorm cooking fire and mild trampoline trauma. But maybe the biggest thing left behind was a sense of humility. The Whippet trend was a grand experiment in collective foolishness, a mass, low-stakes rebellion that proved just how far people will go for a quick laugh, a feeling of belonging, or simply something to break the routine. For a moment, a kitchen staple became a cultural icon, and the world learned that even the most innocent products can be repurposed for absurdity if you leave them unattended with a group of bored people long enough. And what did we lose? Not much in the grand scheme. A few brain cells, perhaps. Some dignity. The last vestiges of our parents' trust. But nothing so serious that it couldn't be laughed off at the next reunion, or sheepishly recounted as that one time when the Whippet era didn't break anyone, it just left us with a bit more caution, a few more stories, and a renewed appreciation for putting whipped cream where it actually belongs. As for the festival bathrooms, well, Some mysteries are meant to endure. Perhaps the lingering scent of vanilla is the universe's way of reminding us. Life is short, trends are shorter, and sometimes the cleanup takes a lot longer than the fun. In the end, what the whippet trend really left behind was proof that history is made not just by the bold or the brilliant, but also by the bored, the curious, and those who never pass up a chance to turn dessert into a communal adventure. So as you look back on the whippet hangover of a generation, take a moment to smile. The craze may be over, but the spirit of spontaneous nonsense lives on, and somewhere a can of whipped cream is waiting, innocent as ever, for whatever comes next. You know a trend has truly made it when it appears everywhere, from punchlines on late-night TV to gritty exposés on streaming services. Whippets weren't just a secret party trick. They became cultural shorthand for that one weird phase a generation collectively decided to not talk about at family gatherings. At first, Nitrous Oxide drifted into the pop culture mainstream as a running gag, a throwaway line on sitcoms, a visual punchline in comedy sketches, or a mischievous subplot in a coming-of-age movie. If a character wanted to break the rules, be hilariously irresponsible, or crash a birthday party, out came the whipped cream can. Audiences roared as fictional teens giggled uncontrollably, balloon in hand, while confused parents wandered in with a tray of actual dessert. It was silly, relatable, and at least for anyone who'd ever attended a college party, a little too close to home. Soon, even animated shows and adult cartoons jumped on the bandwagon. The whippet made cameo appearances in the hands of anti-heroes and background characters. One episode of a beloved animated series featured a subplot where an entire neighborhood block party devolved into a whipped cream-fueled carnival of chaos. The underlying message was always the same. This isn't just a joke, it's a phenomenon you're probably familiar with, even if you pretend you aren't. Of course, late-night television couldn't resist. Stand-up comedians squeezed every drop of material from the trend, riffing on the absurdity of getting high off a dessert topping and the impossible task of explaining it to anyone over 40. Monologues joked about the state of the nation when the biggest public health scare involved Reddi-wip, and variety show hosts held mock Whippet Olympics to see which celebrity could do the silliest balloon dance. The laughter was knowing, half can you believe this? And half yeah, me too. Pop culture didn't just stop at humour though. As the trend grew, so did the scrutiny. News outlets and documentary filmmakers saw an opportunity to dive deep. Streaming platforms released specials with ominous titles like Behind the Balloons, The Whippet Epidemic, featuring slow-motion shots of festival fields at sunrise, interviews with former enthusiasts, and the inevitable montage of discarded chargers and regretful selfies. Public health experts weighed in, and concerned parents gave heartfelt interviews about the time they found a dozen empty cans in the garage. Music videos and pop lyrics started to reference the craze as well, sometimes obliquely, sometimes with a wink so obvious it threatened to cause facial cramps. In one viral music video, the lead singer, surrounded by clouds of whipped cream, crooned about floating for a moment just to come back down. TikTok dances with balloons became a trend within the trend, blurring the lines between parody and participation. The Whippets' journey from niche subculture to viral sensation was complete. By the time the documentary started rolling credits and the punchlines started feeling stale, Whippets had cemented their status as generational folklore. They became a convenient way to reference a time of collective silliness, an icebreaker at parties, a punchline at reunions, and the inevitable remember when story during holiday dinners. The whipped cream can on the dessert table started to elicit sideways glances and sheepish grins. Yet, pop culture, with its unerring instinct for moving on, gradually let Whippets fade into the background. The next big fad appeared, the memes evolved, and the can returned to its original innocent purpose, topping desserts rather than inspiring existential crises. Still, every now and then, an old episode or throwback meme resurfaces, and a generation quietly laughs, grateful that not every phase is captured in 4K and available on demand. In the end, Nitrous Oxide's pop culture moment was a perfect storm. Absurd, relatable, and weirdly universal, it's a reminder that for a little while everyone's in on the same joke, even if they'd rather not explain it to Grandma. Behind every can of whipped cream is a surprisingly intense world of manufacturing, marketing, and questionable product launches. By the mid-2010s, factories churned out enough nitrous-charged cans to make a dentist nervous. And suddenly, flavours like pumpkin spice bliss started to look a lot more suspicious. Take a moment to imagine the life of a whipped cream can. It starts not in a quaint creamery, but in a bustling industrial plant where conveyor belts clatter and workers in hairnets oversee the assembly of canisters destined for kitchen counters, coffee shops, and, as it turned out, college dorm rooms. Every part of the process is designed for efficiency. Raw cream piped into vast tanks, sweeteners and stabilizers measured with machine precision, and nitrous oxide injected under high pressure to transform a boring dairy product into a frothy, cloud-like delight at the push of a nozzle. By 2015, demand had exploded. The Whippet trend was in full swing, but factories could only guess at why whipped cream sales had doubled every festival season. Was the world experiencing a sudden, insatiable craving for banana splits? Or was there something more subversive afoot, a secret second life for their humble product? Manufacturing plants, eager to keep up, ramped up production. Night shifts were added, new bottling lines installed, and managers quietly speculated about why sales in college towns and urban music venues were so much higher than elsewhere. The marketing departments noticed too. Whipped cream brands, once content with classic and light, launched an all-out flavour war. Caramel swirl, birthday cake, salted pretzel, cotton candy, even, yes, pumpkin spice bliss. The logic was simple. If everyone wanted whipped cream, you might as well offer something for every palate, or at least every TikTok trend. Ads became more youthful and energetic, showing people spraying cream into mouths, onto lattes, or subtly onto balloons at what looked suspiciously like a rave. The subtext was clear, but the plausible deniability was delicious. Promotional giveaways became part of the landscape. Grocery stores and cafes ran free whipped cream Friday events, handing out samples to everyone who bought a dessert, coffee, or really anything at all. Some companies even sent trucks to music festivals, offering complimentary dollops and branded swag, tote bags, t-shirts, even balloon animals. The unspoken understanding, nobody was really there for the pie. Behind the scenes, the whipped cream industrial complex grew increasingly sophisticated. Raw ingredient suppliers struck deals with dairy farmers for the best cream. Gas suppliers ensured a steady flow of nitrous. Packaging designers dreamed up taller, sleeker cans with extra burst power. One company rolled out a new ultra-pressurized can with more servings per ounce, a move that quietly delighted both dessert lovers and anyone planning a weekend of poor decisions. Of course, not everything was sweetness and light. The surge in demand put pressure on every step of the supply chain. Factories faced shortages and shipping delays. Supermarkets, caught off guard by the run on their whipped topping shelves, found themselves in bidding wars with festival vendors and head shops. Even the most jaded distribution managers had to laugh at memos like urgent, need 100 extra cases for Coachella weekend. And then there were the mishaps. Cans occasionally exploded during shipping, causing minor chaos and spectacular messes in the back rooms of supermarkets across the country. There were rumours of a rogue batch of chocolate thunder that foamed uncontrollably. Once, a flavour called Birthday Cake Bonanza briefly trended for all the wrong reasons, after an influencer accidentally launched half the can into a chandelier on livestream. But for the most part, the whipped cream industrial complex rode the wave with grace and a slightly raised eyebrow. They knew exactly what was going on, even if nobody ever said it out loud, because behind every can was a factory, a marketing plan, and a silent prayer that, when the next trend hit, it would be something a little easier to clean up. There's a moment in every Whippet journey where you hesitate, can in hand, friends egging you on, a faint smell of aerosol in the air. The first hit is always the weirdest. A burst of laughter, a flash of dizziness, and a deep, unshakable sense that you probably should have read the label first. Let's set the scene. You're surrounded by a mix of people, some seasoned pros, some just as clueless as you, most of them grinning in anticipation. One person already filming on their phone. Someone hands you a balloon, and suddenly you're centre stage in a very niche, very odd variety show. Your internal voice shuffles between, is this a good idea? And, well, it's happening anyway. The instructions are simple, but everyone insists on giving their own twist. Don't inhale too fast. Hold it in for a second. Try not to laugh too hard. Meanwhile, a friend attempts to demonstrate and immediately dissolves into giggles. This does nothing to calm your nerves. You do a quick mental checklist. Am I hydrated? Do I have to work tomorrow? Has anyone checked the expiration date on this can? The balloon, slightly sticky from a previous user, feels both underwhelming and alarmingly official. You take a deep breath of actual air just to steady yourself. Then, exhaling bravely, you inhale from the balloon. For a split second, nothing happens. Then your vision blurs, the room tilts, and all sound is replaced by a chorus of distant robot voices. It's the sensory equivalent of being dropped into a malfunctioning funhouse, flashing lights, echoing laughter, and a body that feels about as coordinated as a wobbly toddler on a trampoline. Everyone around you is watching, waiting for the moment you cross the invisible line from uncertainty to hilarity. It happens quickly. A grin breaks out on your face, your knees feel like jelly, and your words tumble out in a voice you barely recognize. Someone says, "There it is," and your 10 seconds in Wonderland begin. You giggle at nothing, try to form a sentence, and realize you've forgotten how verbs work. There's a warmth in your chest and a dizziness that's not entirely unpleasant, just weird, like being spun around blindfolded at a childhood birthday party. And then, almost as suddenly as it started, reality snaps back. You blink, look down at the balloon, and wonder if you missed something important. Around you, your friends are clapping, laughing, or reassuring you that everyone's first time is a little weird. You're still a bit dazed, clutching the balloon like a participation trophy, and you're not sure whether to be proud, embarrassed, or just relieved you didn't fall over. Now comes the post-game analysis. How was it? Did you feel it? I told you not to inhale so fast. Someone inevitably brings out a phone and replays your 10-second debut, complete with running commentary and slow-motion edits. You realise, with a sinking feeling, that this clip will live forever in a group chat, or worse, resurface at a reunion. You laugh along, masking the awkwardness with jokes about brain cells and career choices. As the night goes on, you watch others repeat the ritual, each with their own style, some cool and collected, others red-faced and doubled over with laughter. The more experienced Whippet warriors offer tips, trade stories about their own first times, and reminisce about the days when all they worried about was passing a test, not passing out. By the end of the evening, your anxiety is replaced by camaraderie, your doubts by inside jokes. You've joined the club, earned your stripes, and maybe, just maybe, gained a tiny bit of wisdom about the allure of mildly dangerous fun. Later, when you see a can of whipped cream at a party, you'll smile knowingly, and, if you're smart, keep it strictly for the pie. Because your first Whippet isn't just a rite of passage, it's a story, a shared laugh, and a reminder that some lessons are best learned with friends, a camera phone, and a healthy respect for warning labels. So tonight, as you settle into your bed, no neon lights, no pounding bass, no mysterious pile of empty whipped cream cans on the nightstand. Take a moment to appreciate the warm, rational, and mostly nitrous-free comforts of modern life. We've just drifted through a decade where dessert met disaster, where grown adults willingly inhaled the same gas that powers birthday cake decorations and dental procedures, all for 10 seconds of cosmic giggles and a fleeting sense of invincibility. Maybe you were there, standing in a muddy festival field, feeling your brain do cartwheels while someone in a banana costume offered you a canister. Maybe you watched from the sidelines, quietly wondering if your generation was just a tiny bit too creative for its own good. But here's the truth. Every era has its trends, its triumphs, its lessons learned the hard way. The Whippet craze was loud, weird, sometimes dangerous, often hilarious, and entirely human. It was about escape, about fitting in, about finding a moment of joy when the world felt overwhelming. It was also about headaches, embarrassing group photos, and the realization that sometimes you really can have too much of a good thing, especially if that good thing tastes like synthetic vanilla. Let's honor the resilience of everyone who survived that wild chapter, the friends who kept you grounded, the festival medics who handed out oxygen, and the store clerks who pretended not to notice your weekly whipped cream emergencies. These are the quiet heroes who made it through the sugar rush, the regret and the existential confusion, all without losing their sense of humor. So as you turn off your phone, fluff your pillow, and let your mind wander, remember, the world is full of strange, fleeting fads, but comfort is timeless. Be grateful for soft beds, steady hearts, and dreams that don't come in a can. May your sleep tonight be deep, peaceful, and uninterrupted by any mysterious hissing noises. Good night, and thank you for listening.